But I want to start out a little differently and ask a question. Because and we've made references, several times to the vision or the mission of the parish. And what I want to ask you here and at Queensbury and Aniowanta, or however that is pronounced, the parish exists to. Take a moment for the two introverts that are in the room to finish the sentence. Take a moment in silence. The parish exists to. Does everybody, and including the remote sites, have a few words to answer that? And assuming that you do, please turn to one, at most two others, and share with them how you answer that sentence. The parish exists to. Do that now for just a couple minutes. Okay, I thought it was interesting as I asked that question, and especially as I asked you to share, that half of you immediately stared at the floor. Now, for those of you here in the room or in our remote sites, what are some of the answers? Why does the parish exist? To make the kingdom of God present, yes?
To bring God into the community.
To bring God into the community. Why else?
To carry out the mission of Jesus.
To carry out the mission of Jesus. What else? Anyone from the remote sites who we want to tell us what you came up with? Not all at once because we can't hear it.
We're called to gather as a community, to worship God, to serve each other and the poor, and to teach the gospel.
Okay. A nice rounded, full definition. How about Aniowanta? Yes. What? Nice and loud, somebody.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Somebody said to help the parish community serve the communities.
To help the parish community to serve the community. Isn't it interesting, all the different answers we got? My question to you, especially as the planning committee, is how effective can an organization be that doesn't have a common understanding of why it exists? Ooh. Did I ask that? Yes, I did. Okay. How many of you here and at the remote sites working in parishes have a parish mission statement? Okay, looks like about 4/5 of the group and plenty in the trenches. How many here can recite the mission statement? We've got one in the back. Stand up and do it.
As the community of St. Patrick, our mission is to be a welcoming Catholic community sharing God's immeasurable love. We recited it as a community at the end of every liturgy.
Excellent. Thank you. Round of applause because again, my question is, how effective can your mission statement be if nobody knows it? In my own diocesan department, we crafted a truly poetic, theological, powerful statement of mission. It only took 8 months. Has anyone been through the mission process? Absolutely. And 6 weeks later, I went to a staff meeting and I said, why do we exist? And there was this silence, and we heard phrases and a couple of words, etc. Now, if you go to a major business, major corporation, they will tell you what the mission statement is. McDonald's, we do it all for you. And I could rattle off many more. My own department now has, as a mission statement, serving parish leaders, helping to build vibrant parishes. Everyone can remember it. You could put it on a refrigerator magnet and put it on the sacred space of every home. Where do you put the sacred things in a home? All of the, grandkids' artwork, etc., is there on the refrigerator magnets in your kitchen. If your planning processes are going to be successful, hopefully they are going to have captivating, engaging vision and mission statements that stretch the community beyond where you are right now. And hopefully they're well-grounded. Believe it or not, there is an official answer to the question of why the parish exists. It's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. You can all look it up, section 2179, in case you want to write that down. And there are 4 purposes. Number 1, to be a community of faith under the leadership of a shepherd, a pastor. 2, to celebrate the Eucharist and the sacraments. 3, the place where we teach Christ's saving doctrine. 4, it's the place where we put into practice Christian charity, brotherly and sisterly love. At least as foundational, we should have a common understanding of those 4 building blocks. Now, when we take those questions of that mission, and it's kind of nice when it works with one parish, but regretfully, or maybe as a blessing, we're challenged to do it in multiple parish and multiple different ways. And that's where I want to share some of the data and some of the research that Father Jim and Dan referred to earlier. So I've made my general comments. We'll talk about transitioning, impact on leaders, which models, building unity. And again, this is only a 3-day workshop that will finish in the next 25 minutes. So bear with me, but feel free to ask some questions. Let's look at the changing complexity of parishes. The traditional parish, across the top, this is national data based on the Emerging Models Project, is 61% of the parishes in the United States. Traditional means one pastor, one community, and more or less homogeneous. All right. These numbers I want to suggest to you come from 2010 research, and they're already out of date. Okay? In the Diocese of Green Bay, where I come from, we have over 60% of our parishes share a pastor with at least one other parish, and we have had as many as 6 parishes under one pastor. And non-verbally, several of the priests in the room are looking at me like, oh my God, the man must be a saint. He isn't. He's a fairly standard, real guy. Father Gary. And I want to share a little bit of his story. He came to me about 8-9 years ago, and he had just said yes. Father Gary was not the most assertive person. I wouldn't say at first glance he was the most dynamic, talented, wonderful guy I had ever met. And he had kind of in a weak moment said yes. And came to me and he said, oh, Mark, I know you wrote this book about pastoring multiple parishes. Tell me about the techniques. What am I going to do? And the first thing I did with Father Gary is I said, well, Father Gary, before we get into some of the nuts and bolts, and we will, I said, could you tell me what your gift is? He looked at me funny, and I said, in ministry, what is it that makes your heart sing? And he looked at me and he said, don't give me that touchy-feely stuff. I need help. And I said, go with me on this. And Father Gary said, well, believe it or not, I love working with youth and young adults. But I had to give that up years ago. It's now the DRE's job. And so the first thing I said, when we have the resources of 6 parishes coming together, the first thing we're going to do is carve out a schedule and a plan. So for Father Gary, Tuesday afternoons was his prep time, and Tuesday evenings was his youth and young adult group. He had the most dynamic youth young adult group in the diocese. And then I asked Father Gary the second question, what is it in ministry that draws the life right out of you? Anyone want to guess what he said? Meetings, administration, finances, supervising staff, etc. And the next thing I said to Father Gary, as we put this together, we're going to help you assemble a team that first of all is going to have the best business manager money can buy to complement your gifts. By bringing the resources of 6 parishes together, he was able to establish a team that had a full-time business manager, that had a full-time master-level faith formation director, who had a person with an MDiv to help him with pastoral care. And he ran a Catholic grade school. Father Gary will tell you it was the most dynamic, blessed time of his entire ministry before he retired 2 years ago. Okay? So, this next model is the consolidated model, the merger of parishes, but 27% of our parishes are multi-parish across the country. Again, I'd suggest this is a low number. In my diocese, it's over 60%. Some dioceses, it's even higher, 70, 80%, especially if you include missions. You have missions in the diocese, correct? How many missions function like parishes? A lot of them. We have some missions that don't even know they're missions because they've been functioning like parishes for so long. Parishes with pastoral life coordinators. We don't have time to plunge into that, but Canon 517.2, I know that you have some here in the diocese, where the basic pastoral care of the parish is entrusted to a lay person, a religious or a deacon. We have 17 of them that serve something like 28 parishes. So we even have pastoral life coordinators that serve more than one parish. And last, and growing, is the multicultural parish, where at least one Mass each weekend is said in another language. We also have multicultural parishes that are the Germans and the Irish. Have you had that experience? Or the Polish? Okay. You know these dynamics of these cultures which are sacred. In many of our cities, I think of the city of Manitowoc in my diocese, we had 6 parishes within a 1.5-mile radius of one another, all based on ethnic allegiances historically. And they all tell stories about how when they were growing up and they saw somebody from St. Mary's walking towards them and they would go to the other side of the street. Has that been your experience? Several of you are nodding your heads. Absolutely. So, we did, based on the research, a look from the pew to evaluate how multiple parish ministry is working. And we asked people to rank liturgies, parish vision, stewardship, faith formation, evangelization, youth ministry, faith formation for kids, adults, leadership, parish involvement, intercultural, and now it's time for another group discussion. As you look at all of these ministries, which one is done, or which ones are done better in traditional parishes, again, one pastor, one community, than in multiple parish? Okay, so if you look at all of these, which ones, if you're in a traditional parish and you're sitting in the pew, you're probably going to rank higher than if you're in a parish that is sharing a pastor with 1 or 2 other parishes. And yes, you can cheat and talk to your neighbor now. They're hard to read in the back. Can I what? Read them out loud. Liturgies, parish vision, stewardship, faith formation in general, evangelizing, preparation for the sacraments, youth ministry, faith formation for kids, faith formation adults, leadership of the pastor, parish involvement, intercultural ministry. Which are done better in a traditional parish than in a multi-parish setting? And Queensbury will ask for your response first.
Yeah, I would think it would depend on who's involved in the parishes. Doesn't necessarily be one or the other.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I think of all 14, I don't think there's one answer. I think it depends on who's in the parish, both leadership and people.
Okay, so leadership people, all 14, even though there's 12 up there.
And resources available.
Okay. Anyone else want to, in the room here, want to try an answer? You say parish vision and stewardship. Okay, anyone else want to try? There is an answer. Yes?
I think that the parishes that all come together, several parishes, is the answer, because when you have all the talent from all those people who are pulling together, you have a great resource to solve the problems.
Okay, well, the answer is intercultural ministry. Surprisingly enough, all the other areas of ministry, statistically, from the viewpoint of the person in the pew, are rated identically, except for intercultural ministry. Now, we did not have time to drill down into the reason for that, but there was a statistical difference when it came to the person in the pew and how they ranked that particular ministry. Now, the reason I share this with you is that many people, when we look at multiple parish ministry, immediately assume that there's no way that the people can be served or be happy in that model. And the research doesn't bear that out because of the ability of communities to ideally come together, and we'll talk about where that's feasible and not, to share resources. And in fact, like with the story of Father Gary, if you looked at the level of the marriage prep program that they had before they brought together the staff and team, the baptism prep, adult faith formation, the religious ed program, all of those improved in quality when they were able to create the synergy of coming together and sharing resources. So one of the key questions is, what's your basic attitude going in? And it's a critical question. Do you think of it as, oh my God, no, fear, anxiety, looking for problems? Guess what? You'll find them. Or is it excitement, anticipation of the possibilities? I have twice as many resources to draw on. Basic example, worship committee. How many parishes struggle to, have a really good worship committee, and sometimes you have 3 or 4 people. Now you bring them together, there's 8. And there's new ideas, new possibilities that can emerge. Sometimes we have really good dynamic parishes who we link with parishes that, and there probably aren't many in the Diocese of Albany, but we have 1 or 2 in Green Bay, which I would call minimalist parishes. They have Mass on Sunday and a religious ed program for the kids, but not much else. When you bring them together, hopefully the well-rounded parish pulls along the parish that's a little less animated in its programs and its activities. The challenge is to make sure it doesn't go the other way. which can also be very real. Beware of self-fulfilling prophecies here. If you go in with a chip on your shoulder, whether you're a member of the staff, whether you're one of the parish leaders, the pastor, pastoral coordinator, be careful. Look at it as an opportunity, and it can and will be. Important mindset. When you think about leading two parishes, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. 1 + 1 equals 3. And what I mean by this is that you have to keep in mind Parish A, Parish B, and the impact that A has on B and B has on A. So, for example, I brought together 2 parishes not too long ago. One parish had the custom of paying a $50 stipend to each of their catechists each year. The other parish did not. Okay, you've got an issue because people talk to each other. And it has to be dealt with. Another example, and these are just small examples, there's obviously bigger issues when you're coming together. One parish had this incredible men's group that took care of all the maintenance in the parish and then some. The other parish had a full-time paid maintenance staff. In fact, they had a full-time and a half-time person. Well, the parish that was being run with all the volunteers were saying, why are you paying for that? What's wrong with the rest of your parishioners? And the group that had the maintenance staff was saying, boy, you got to be careful because of insurance liability, other issues, with you people taking care of the parish. So you have to negotiate. You always have to keep in mind not just one parish, not the other, but the two and that relationship. Multiple parish ministry. It's a group of priests in 2007 who were meeting with Pope Benedict. And one of the pastors said, Holy Father, how can I be a pastor when I've got 5 to 6 parishes? And I love the Holy Father's response. First thing we have to do is help your bishop to see clearly how to ensure that the parish priest continues to be a pastor and does not become a holy bureaucrat. How many of our pastors have become holy bureaucrats? Are we making the best use? Again, research that has been done. Protestant pastors across the country, on average, when we talk about meetings and administration, spend 14% of their time in administration. Catholic priests, the number's 31%. What's wrong with that picture? Are we making the best use of the gifts and talents and the charisms of our priests? The Holy Father went on, and it's a point that Dan was emphasizing. And he said, furthermore, I think it important to find the right ways to delegate. The priest should be the one, and I like this image, who holds the essential reins, but himself relies on collaborators. Note we're saying delegate, not abdicate responsibility. How do you hold those reins, stay in communication, monitor, supervise staff so that the mission of the parishes moves forward? So how do you migrate from one to more than one? This is a whole workshop in itself. Ideally, the result of a multiple-year process. It's data and mission-driven, participative, collaborative pastoral planning that engages the whole parish. And that's what you've been hearing from Monsignor Lang and Dan throughout. So I'm going to zip through that. Know that as the plans evolve, and you have already learned this with the planning and implementation that you have already done, the remote preparation is key. If you know with your planning that a marriage is coming, please start dating now. In very real and concrete ways, start to build the bridge of relationship, of learning to work together. Once in a while, do a pulpit swap. Find a common mission project that you can do together. Learn how to work together on some, keep it simple, projects. Get to know, share those common. Shared retreats. You know, when you have training for liturgical ministers, do it together. For care ministers that are going to help with visiting the sick and homebound, do it together. We can go on and on through the catechist training. Do it together. Use those opportunities. Consider a pulpit swap. You know, if you know of one of the other pastors is going to be the linker and one's going to leave, it shouldn't be a surprise the first day of the new linkage when they meet the pastor for the first time. Yeah. Make sure that they have seen them at least a couple of times, preaching and proclaiming the Word of God. Proximate preparation is the next key one. That's 6 to 8 months out, and that's a whole very specific process. Ideally, 2 to 3 reps that study, recommend, talk through the details of the linkage. Biggest issue they're going to have to face is what? Anybody? Money is one. Mass schedule is the number one. Okay? Mass schedule is number one. We'll be more than happy to share our pastor, just don't touch our 9 o'clock Mass. Right? The next one is, where's the pastor going to live? You know, if he's going to, we're more than happy to share him as long as he lives here. Now, one thing we've found that helps with that is to have the pastor live in Parish A, and if you're going to consolidate any staff, have them in Parish B. Each has a symbol about their viability into the future. Plus, it affords the pastor an opportunity to not have to live over the store. Yeah? And gives them some separation, some space. And it has been very helpful. The transition committee in the handout, and there is a handout of this PowerPoint that I hope you're getting at the remote sites, but if not, here at this site we're going to hand out. The role of the transition committee is spelled out. This is again to help the pastor, first of all, that's leaving, to say goodbye. Because until there is some closure in saying goodbye, it's very difficult to now say hello to a new pastor. In our diocese each spring, before the pastoral assignment, or just after the pastoral assignments are made, we do a transition workshop with the priests, and pastoral leaders, and we do one with staff and parish council to talk about transition. So, there are no silver bullets as to one way to do this. In fact, as you'll see if you ever pick up the marvelous book, Pastoring Multiple Parish, I think you can get it on Amazon used for about $2 at this point. It's a good $2. Okay. There are at least 6 models, and we don't have the time to go through them all. The first one is separate parishes coordinated. Basically what you have, and this pointer is not working. Okay. What you have is 3 separate parishes, and each has a pastor, and in the center is a what are you doing, Dan? Oh no, you're I'm doing fine. Thank you. Thank you. This is 3 separate parishes. In the center is a coordinating committee. This is the model to help begin the dating. This is where ideally you come together maybe a couple times a year and explore what kinds of things we can work on together. And it might be 1 or 2 projects initially. And this is what we call the polite model. As long as everyone is in agreement and there's an agenda that everyone can agree to, you can do all kinds of things collaboratively. But it's a place to start. The second model, 1 pastor and what we call local leadership. This is where there may be somebody on site, who is staffing the office. The symbol of having an open office is an important one. Now, in some parishes, they'll consolidate all of the, quote, professional staff, but still have a half-time office for handling basic phone calls, mass intentions, etc., but at least they have an office. Now, some, they may even have a deacon who's working on a full-time basis, or a pastoral minister who has a master's, who kind of runs day-to-day things, and supports the basic program. So this is another model, which again, still has a coordinating committee so that you can look at those things that can be shared in common. Model 3 is separate parishes now, but there's one coordinating committee, one pastor. There's very limited staff at the sites. Model 4, one pastor, and now you have an area pastoral council. You may still have reps and have parish councils, but it's the area pastoral council and staff centralized that serve the 3 parishes. The pastoral councils may meet 4 times a year, finance councils 4 times a year, but the area council meets 6 or 8 times a year. So that you grow into this. You'll notice that with these models, you can grow through them over time, but not necessarily, as we'll see in a minute. Model 5 is the merged parish. This is where you have consolidated everything, except you maintain more than one worship site. We have 17 parishes that between them have 42 worship sites. That's way more than we need. But we know from experience that initially when we do some of these major reorganizations, to be able to have a Mass, or as many would say, we would like to have weddings and funerals and a Mass once or twice a year. And in people's passion, for a year or 2, that's what they want. Usually after about 2 years, you can come in and we say, okay, but we're going to visit it every year and assess whether it's feasible and makes sense to continue. It usually takes about 2 years before people realize that God does show up in those other churches. And some of those people in those other churches are really nice people. And I now have a new pew that is mine. Okay? And they're at a point where you can say, is it good stewardship? Is this the best use of our resources to carry out that mission that we talked about? And people will say reluctantly, no, it's time for us to let go. But it happens more organically. And the last model, which is fairly radical, is to close all 3 churches and build a brand new one. That takes about 3 to 5 years to facilitate, with good leadership and under some ideal circumstances. We've had it happen at least 3 times in the last 15 years. The sense of pride and energy that people have to build a church that's going to serve the Catholic community long after I'm gone can be very, very energizing. But it has to evolve organically. It can't be forced. With all of these, there's a number of organizational variables. And a lot of it has to do to what extent are we going to respect the individual sites, to what extent are we going to centralize. And there's no black and white predictor of which to use. So with the research, how are pastors doing with all of this? First of all, they're happy. 42% very happy. 51% fairly happy. That's 93%. That's not bad. Okay. They're appreciated. 64 very much, 32 moderately. So again, works very, very well. What are their biggest challenges? The belief that they have a lack of time. Yeah. How many here have enough time? Okay, we all have a lack of time. The question is how you manage it. Time is not one of those things where you can go walking along, look under a tree and say, oh, there's 2 hours. Doesn't work that way. We have a limited amount. The question is, how do we manage our time, set priorities to help carry out the mission? And that's another 2-hour workshop. The inability of communities to cooperate and collaborate. They get jealous. Obviously the pastor likes you best. This is like, for those of us who are married, parenting. How many of you parented every one of your kids the exact same way? Father did? Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Years ago, my staff, very proud of it, gave me a t-shirt and it had American flags on both shoulders, and on the front it said, "Proud father of a Peace Corps daughter," which I had. On the back it said, "Proud father of a Marine Corps son," in the same family. How do we maintain a unity, and how did we parent them? Very different. The Peace Corps daughter was an academic wonder, never had to worry about her. The Marine Corps son, we were glad that he made it through high school. All 4 of my kids are doing just great. But we have to be sensitive to the unique characteristics of each community that we serve. Finding replacements, the fact that many of our linked, merged, consolidated parishes are small. Parish staff, what are their rewards? The peer support that you can work with. If you're the faith formation director in one place, and you're kind of a lone ranger, but to now have a co-worker, other staff, more volunteers to create, to draw talents from, greater volunteer pools, increased level of responsibility and accomplishment. If I'm going to put all this work into creating great materials, wouldn't it be great if they could be used with more than 50 kids, but 150? They can be their challenges, the supervisor is not as available. And this is where the question of supervision and monitoring is critical. Anxiety about the future, having to keep in mind that other parish and to collaborate. Parishioner, what are their rewards? Improved services, the future secured, and in some cases a revitalized parish. Parishioner challenges, maintaining identity, grieving the loss or sharing a pastor. Fear of closure, adjusting to new leaders. So which model do you use? And just to finish up fairly quickly, it depends. What does it depend on? First of all, you can't force community. You can't mandate it. Don't even try. Otherwise, you have a situation like this cartoon with the barbed wire going down the middle of church. And people will circle the wagons and resist. People don't mind change. They mind being changed. So the key is that collaborative process. Change is easy. Transition, the things of the heart and soul, take a lot more time and patience. Each parish has a unique culture. Respect it as much as possible. Okay? Find those common areas of collaboration and move on from there. Respect it. Which vision? How do you find that potential for greater cooperation? Is it great? Is it moderate? Is it unlikely? You can actually do a cultural exegesis. Look at the ethnic, ecclesial size, relative size, economic health, geography, decision-making, parish priorities, staffs, parishioner involvements, tolerance. We have a one-page that has all of these that help you assess whether it's realistic. I have some parishes that we linked 15 years ago that are no closer together today than they were 15 years ago. I have other parishes that we link, and within 3 to 5 years, the level of cooperation, collaboration that they foster is so great, they ask the diocese if it's okay to consolidate. That's the ideal kind of a circumstance. And it's not just a function of leadership. Again, a quick story. Our own cathedral does not have its own pastor. It's shared with another parish 3 blocks away. The cathedral is the cathedral, in its majesty and in its role and everything in the diocese. The parish 3 blocks away took their former grade school, turned it into a homeless shelter, is the lightning rod for Catholic social teaching and social justice work in the diocese. The pastor who we sent there was very successful, having 4 small-town rural communities work together. He thought he would bring in the same model with these 2 parishes 3 blocks apart. After 2 years, he realized that wasn't going to happen. And when he did, his level of satisfaction in ministry and the community's respect for him and one another rose significantly when he took people where they were. So, how do you balance? Honor the history, look at the parish's community of communities, and create that parish mosaic. Not a melting pot, but a mosaic. This is what Pope Francis talks about too. And how do you do it? Francis says when leaders ask for advice, dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. Which is what Dan and Monsignor Lang was talking about. How are you going to build unity? Help people learn how to work together. The stumbling block to unity, believe it or not, is to announce it as your goal. Why? Because that means you're going to gobble me up, especially if I'm even 50 families smaller than you. It's worse if you have a 1,000-family parish and a 300-family parish. They circle the wagons, and it becomes very awkward. So systems normally resist change. Build bridges. I talked about some of those activities: shared youth group, mission trip, community service. We have a program called Christ Renews His Parish. Do they have that in the diocese? No, it's a Curcio that's done at the parish by parishioners for parishioners that really helps people encounter the risen Lord and has animated small groups, rotating. There's many, many other. Again, what's unique? What can we share in common? How can you provide pastoral leadership to each? There are many, many practices, and in the handout you'll find many more on the slides, which we don't have time to go through. But these are the key things I wanted to share with you about multiple parish. Don't be afraid of it. Trust the people. Prayerfully discern how compatible they are, what the possibilities are for working together, and over time, you can build a new unity. With that, I'm going to stop, and we have been talking at you for a long time. I want to give you about 10 minutes to talk to no less than 2 other people, so get into groups of 3, to react to anything that all 3 of us have had to say, and then we'll still have about 15 minutes to entertain some questions from you.